Hello everyone, welcome to this deep dive into OSPF. If you are looking to master one of the most powerful routing protocol in networking, you are in the right place. In this video, we'll kick off things with an introduction to OSPF, why it is used, why it's used and why it applies in real world networks. Whether you are preparing for certifications and looking to sharpen your networking skills, this series will help you understand OSPF inside and out. Let's get started. OSPF has been used by many real world different cases. For example, if we say about ISP used OSPF for efficient internal routing and fast convergence. It is also being used by the enterprise networks to connect multiple office and data centers, and government and military provide secure and reliable networking. University campus also use this to manage traffic across large institution. Also, the metro networks. Also we can say about like carrier networks, which support city-wide and connectivity and services. So let's go. So OSPF protocol is like a link state interior gateway protocol, which was developed by the Internet Engineering Task Force. Currently, OSPF version 2 defined in RFC 2328 and is intended for IPv4 version. As you already, all of you might have the basic knowledge about IPv4, which is the Internet Protocol version 4, and OSPF version 3, which is currently being deployed all over the world. Maybe it is already being deployed. It is already deployed by the world, all over the most of the major enterprises and major data centers, major carrier networks, and it is defined in the 2740 and was intended for IPv6. Unless otherwise, this series of trainings we will be going to discuss OSPF version 2. So uh, I recommend you to look for 3 questions. Whenever you are going to look for the concept, you must ask yourself 3 questions about three like how, what, and why. So based on these questions, we will be going to discuss what is OSPF. So why do we need OSPF? What is the basic concept of OSPF and how does OSPF work? This is just an introduction of OSPF. In this video, we are going to discuss just the basics of OSPF. Before the emergence of OSPF, the routing protocol RIP was widely used in as an IGP. Yes, you know that the the major application for OSPF is the IGP. So before OSPF, there was a RIP, which was a distance vector protocol. So which is gradually being replaced by the OSPF due to the former low convergence tendency to form routing loop and poor scalability. In contrast, OSPF is a link state routing protocol featuring like multicast packet transmission, reducing load, and router that do not run OSPF. Support for classless inter-domain routing, load balance among equal cost route, and packet authentication. So with the preceding advantages, OSPF is widely accepted and used as an IGP. IGP is an interior gateway protocol which is required to share internal network routing information whether within one AS, within one autonomous system. So in basic concepts of OSPF, in this video we are only going to discuss about router ID. What is router ID? And what is the I would say this router ID is one of the most important characteristics of the OSPF, which is very important for OSPF to run. If you want to run OSPF on your network, in any network, you must have a router ID. If you don't select a router ID, if you don't configure a router ID, system will automatically configure the router ID by itself. A router ID is a 32-bit unassigned integer, uniquely identifying as a router in a AS. A router ID can be manually configured or automatically selected by the router, as already discussed. So it is recommended. It is very recommended, as you if you are going to design a new network, I recommend you that you must manually configure the router ID to ensure the OSPF stability. There are many issues related to OSPF. If we do not configure the router ID, there will be many conflicts. So for better, it is recommended you must configure the router ID. In most of the networks that which I have seen, I found the router ID is already being configured specifically for the OSPF. There are other routing protocols like MPLS, LDP, and BGP. The router ID is explicitly configured for them as well. But I would recommend for OSPF, for every IGP, router ID should be configured in case of OSPF specifically. If no router ID is manually configured for a router, the router selects an interface IP address as its router ID. So it will pick the IP address of an interface where OSPF is configured as its router ID if you do not configure it. Even a router ID selects its router ID based on the following rules. So the following are the few rules that are to select a router ID. The router preferentially select the largest IP address among loopback interface addresses as its router ID. So if you do not configure the router ID, what will you do? It will select the IP address of the interface. If not, then it will select the IP address of the loopback interfaces. Okay, loopback interfaces. And if no loopback interface is configured, the router select the largest IP address among the interface address as its router ID. First of all, the OSPF will look for the router ID which you already configured. But if you do not configured, it will look for the loopback. And if loopback is also not configured, then it will go for the largest IP address among other interfaces as its router ID. So this was just brief introduction about what is router ID. Also, there is one rule: after the router ID has been running OSPF and selecting its router ID, it still uses this router ID if the interface whose IP address is used as the router ID is down or disappear. For example, if we take an example, the router goes down and the OSPF selected the highest interface IP as a router ID, then what will happen? Then it will go to look for a second scenario or disappear. For example, the undo IP loopback command, loopback number command is done, or larger IP address exists. The router can obtain a new router ID only after a router ID is reconfigured for the router, or OSPF router ID is reconfigured and the OSPF process restart. So following are the cases whenever the router ID will go selected again. So now let's discuss how to check the router ID in different vendors across. So basically, I mostly worked on a Huawei network, so I will discuss with the Huawei routers first. So if you want to check the router ID for a interface where the OSPF is configured, for the interface the OSPF is configured, which is you can use the display command, display OSPF interface, and then the interface where it is configured. In case of Cisco, you can check the router ID by show IP OSPF, the process ID command. Here you see that for this process 100, the router ID is mentioned here. In case of Juniper's router, you can check through show OSPF overview brief, and then you can check the router ID here. But in case of Palo Alto, you need to check. You need to go navigate to network routing and then logical routers. Then you can go to the OSPF, and here I mentioned already. I highlighted the part where you can find the router ID. So that's all in this video. We only discussed what is the router ID and what is the brief introduction about OSPF and where it is being used for the enterprises, for data center, for governments, for government and military purposes, for university and campus, and carrier networks. It is widely used just for the internal network routing, to share internal network routing information. So that's all for this today's session. Next we will look into the link state. What is link state, which is also covers as a basic concept of OSPF, and what is the cost, what does cost mean in OSPF. Till then, thank you.